Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here for this really exciting session on the future of oil and gas in Iraq. My name is Ellen Scholl. I'm the Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center, and I am really, really excited and honored to be here for this afternoon session and introducing His Excellency, Mr. Jafar al-Luebi, the Oil Minister of Iraq since 2016. We are incredibly excited to have you here for the second year in a row at the Global Energy Forum and are truly honored that you've made the trip.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I want to first open with a question to you so that you can set the scene for us here, looking forward after a really, really big and exciting close to 2017 with incredibly high export numbers in Iraq and an incredibly high Iraqi oil production. So I wanted to get your sense, Mr. Minister, of what Iraq's key achievements were in 2017, what you see as really having facilitated the dramatic increases that we've seen in production, particularly given difficult security circumstances over the last few years, and what you are most excited about looking forward in 2018 and how that relates to the conditions we're seeing in the international oil market. Particularly given that we've seen oil prices hit numbers that we have not seen now in 3 years.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this session, and thank you to be in this great event. I express my gratitude and my thanks for the organizers of this forum, and I hope all success for the forum. As you may know, and everybody know, I think, aware of the situation of the oil markets and the energy, global energy, and the fluctuation that has been through for the last few years, and the up and downs, and those the oil prices and unsettlement and so on. All those really affected the oil prices, many factors, not only the political, but also the disturbances in production, the rise of production in shale oil in the U.S. and other factors. So the approach, the slide down of the prices during 2014-2015 was a severe hit to the industry. And ever since, there was a lot of changes, there was a lot of pressure on the industry here and there, and there was a lot of uncertainties, whether in investment, whether in vigility, or whether in other aspects. So everybody was really in somehow uncertain about the industry and the path of the industry. But thank God, the efforts were great within the OPEC members and outside the OPEC producing countries. And there was a lot of effort exerted really by the OPEC Secretary General and the ministers of Saudi Arabia and the UAE and others, in forming a new formula in OPEC. And 2016 we gathered in Algiers, and there was a lot of options, there was a lot of discussions about the OPEC and the oil prices and the settlement and the market and the fluctuation in the market. And ever since, really, the efforts were fruitful in reaching the OPEC declaration in November 2016. And that was really the first step in improving the stability of the oil market and with consequent improving in the prices. Though there was, at the beginning, there was a slight improvement, but then the improvement continued to grow. And as you can see, after that, we agreed last December that the freeze in the production to continue another year up throughout 2018. And that was really good impact on the market stability as well as the prices improvement. With this all difficulties, all challenges, Iraq stood in the middle of this storm. And Iraq, as you may know, that a country that rely 97% of revenue on oil marketing, and at the same time Iraq was fighting the most barbarous invasion that took place 2014 and occupied one-third of the country. And ISIS not only occupied the third of the country, but also destroyed almost every living or every aspect of civilization, whether buildings, infrastructure, oil infrastructures, museums, every civilization, and schools, universities. So there was really a darkness that took place and covered all occupied territory of Iraq. And ever since Iraq 2014 up to 2016, Iraq was suffering a lot from ISIS and the drop in oil prices. But thank God that Iraq stood very firm and very strong to fight ISIS. And thank God that Iraq was able to defeat ISIS and get ISIS out of the country and started to rebuild itself again, and with the good faith and its people, as well as the ability of the people and the ability of the oil sector, as well as other economical sectors. However, for Iraq, the oil, as I said, it's very, very vital for the country, and thank God that the oil industry, in spite of the difficulties, and ISIS damaged about 70% of infrastructure in the north and set fire in about 65 wells, and they did a lot of damage, but we tried very hard and we succeeded to get those back into their shape. And the industry in Iraq, oil industry, is moving very fast and progressing very fast. And the country now we are nearing about production capacity of 5 million barrels per day. But we certainly in full compliance with OPEC declaration, and we don't deviate not an inch from the declaration that we committed ourselves to. And Iraq was really the country that put this declaration and supported this declaration strongly. So whether we reach 5 million or more than 5 million barrels per day, but we still comply with OPEC declaration and the level that's set with OPEC declaration. Other great achievement we achieved in spite of the challenges and difficulties. Our export capabilities increased in the south growth, and we get capacity of 4.6 million barrels per day, and this is the first time in the history of the country. It's a great achievement, really, to reach this. That will offset what we are losing from the stopping of the export from the north. For the gas industry, we moved very fast, and we did a lot of work, and we worked very hard, and the Ministry of Oil with the gas industry and the gas utilization as first priority, and we, within a year or so, we reached increase in gas utilization by 80% from Basra gas, that is Shell, and about 30% by national effort. And by middle of this year, we are heading definitely to conclude 3 giant contracts with international gas companies to utilize the gas in all southern area, a total of 950 million standard cubic feet, and that cover Basra, Nasriya, and Nisan. By implementing this, we aim by 2021, end of 2021, Iraq will reach zero flaring definitely. With this, we have a plan to include some petrochemical industry within our work. So this we achieved in a good manner, and we are very happy with our achievement. For other infrastructure, we have done lots really to implement the projects, very important projects, pipelines and gas lines and tank farms and many other activities. For the affiliate companies with the Ministry of Oil, we have 4 or 5 companies that are in a losing track. Now we form some sort of sharing with reputable companies, and now they are improving, and we are upgrading the efficiency and the performance of those companies. All in all, the oil industry is reforming in a good shape, and I reaffirm that this industry is really emerging in a new energetic form, and it will move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for your very wide-ranging comments and for that excellent scene setter. I think that really frames the conversation that we'd now like to have with the rest of the panel. So if the audience would permit me, I'd like to bring our other panelists up on stage and introduce them. First, we have Mr. Majid Jafar, the CEO of Crescent Petroleum, the largest and oldest private oil and gas company in the Middle East, headquartered here in the UAE. And we really want to thank Mr. Jafar for his support of the Atlantic Council, his support of the Global Energy Forum, and also his support of the report that you all have in your chairs. So thank you very much for joining us here today. I'd also like to bring up on stage Dr. Louis Al-Khatib, the founding director of the always influential Iraq Energy Institute and a fellow at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia. Thanks so much to all of you for joining us, and we're really excited to be here today at the Global Energy Forum, where we're really talking about the future of energy and setting the global energy agenda. And truly, there's almost no country that is more important to the future of the global energy agenda and the future of energy than Iraq, the world's 4th largest oil producer, the 2nd largest producer in OPEC, and as we just heard, a very influential country taking a leadership role in that regard. So it truly is a timely moment to have you here, Mr. Minister, and we appreciate your coming and your comments. And I want to turn first to Majid to talk a little bit about one of your comments that you made yesterday on the CEO panel. You were asked about Iraq, and in responding noted both that Iraq has immense potential and is vastly underexplored. So I'm wondering if you might be able to give some of your insights from a private sector perspective on why Iraq still remains underexplored despite this immense potential that you often have referenced.
So we're headquartered here in the UAE, but we've been proud to have maintained a presence consistently in Iraq, in Baghdad, since the 80s. We're now, as a group, we've invested close to $2.5 billion in the country in the last decade, about half of that in the oil and gas sector, and also through affiliates in the power sector and port management, logistics. So across the energy and logistics infrastructure from the north, the Kurdistan region, center of the country, and in the south down to Qasr port. We've also pre-qualified with the Ministry of Oil in Baghdad, as has our affiliate Dana Gas, and we're going to be bidding on the new fields that have been offered this year by the Ministry of Oil as a priority for development. So Iraq, as everybody knows, has had a turbulent history. There was a kind of peak in terms of post-nationalization and peak production at the time, although it's now been exceeded, which is amazing, as you heard from His Excellency, despite all the challenges. But at the time in the 70s, and then of course there was the Iraq-Iran war, which was a drain on revenues, but also an impediment to investment. But then after that, the 90s with sanctions, and then the wars with the international communities. So in many ways, the Iraqi oil industry became isolated from the international industry in terms of technology, investment, know-how, and exploration. I mean, there's only been a few thousand wells drilled in Iraq's history, and compared to maybe 10 times as many in Saudi Arabia, or over 1 million just in the state of Texas as a comparison. So it's very vastly underexplored. There are dozens of fields which by any international measure would be called giant. In Iraq they call them medium-sized or even smaller, because it's all relative. When there are so many fields, mashallah, over 1 billion barrels in the country. And there's still a lot of exploration. Most of the fields that have been discovered historically are in the populated areas, which you'd expect, from Kirkuk down to Basra. So there are huge parts of the country which are vastly underexplored. For example, we in Crescent did a study. We estimated over 300 structures in the Western Desert, which have potential, which have never even been drilled. So there's a lot of exploration to be done, in addition to the development of the known fields, as well as the investments in gas and the associated infrastructure. So the jump to 140 billion barrels a day, I don't think will be the last jump in Iraq's reserves for sure. And it's really been, in terms of growth, it's been Iraq and the U.S. that have added significant capacity in recent years. And I think that will only continue. I mean, His Excellency mentioned the achievements, but I think maybe he underestimated. When you think the war with ISIS, the lack of the legislation still, issues between central government and regional government in Kurdistan, the infrastructure needs, the huge drain on the budget from the conflicts and salaries and everything else. So with all that as a backdrop, to achieve record production and exports this year is really quite an achievement, and the only way is up going forward.
Certainly, and Louis, I want to turn to you because, as Majid just described, that the landscape the last few years, both in the oil markets and in the region, has not always been easy. And as a scholar, you've written about the political and economic challenges of energy in the Middle East. And so I wanted to get your sense of how these broader framing conditions have impacted Iraq. And in particular, one of the big announcements last year was, of course, Shell's decision to exit Majnoon. And I'm wondering how you see this encapsulating some of these challenges, and if you have any recommendations for how to think about this going forward in 2018.
Thanks, Helen. I mean, first and foremost, I must say that I'm very glad to hear that the Ministry of Oil is working successfully in achieving the gas capture, a well overdue projects that should have been kind of like materialized earlier last year. But now we're hearing that the next target is possibly 2021. This is something quite good to hear, especially the much needed fuel for the national grid required to ease the pressure financially on the budget and the imports of fuel. Also to reduce the burning of crude, which is now exceeding, I think, about 200,000 barrels of oil, something that could, if we release that to the market, it will increase export in the future and generate more revenue to the budget. With regards to further expansions, the revising the fiscal framework of Iraq, it's not kind of like an option, it's a must, and we ought to expand, as Majid and the oil minister mentioned. I think the potential for Iraq is huge, not only to meet market demand globally, but also to meet local demand. We need to highlight that Iraq's refining capacity now, especially after the loss of Beji, is around 600,000 barrels. If we add Kurdistan, maybe another 100,000 to add on top of that. But to meet the local demand, we're talking about at least 1 million, just to reduce the level of imports that we need to that we spend every year. And this will require the expansion on refineries, refining capacity, as well as expanding beyond that level, maybe 1.5 million by 2025, because we need to take into consideration the growth of the population. Over the next decade or 12 years, we could easily exceed the 50 million in terms of population, and this will require meeting the local demand as soon as possible. And this will bring us to the point of the revising fiscal regime to make it more competitive, more attractive, and not very much very rigid, and that would deter or would refrain the IOCs not to engage with Iraq. I mean, it's quite challenging or difficult to see a major company such as Shell relinquishing one supergiant field, one of the very top 10 supergiant fields in Iraq, in a country such as Iraq, a second largest reserves holder. There must be something going wrong. Of course, I personally respect the decision that reached between the Ministry of Oil and Shell, but as an observer, I could see this as a kind of like revoke of confidence, or compromising that level of confidence in Iraq's upstream sector. For Iraq, when it comes to financing mega projects, we need investment, and for this we need new fiscal regimes that create the right balance between the IOCs and the governments, that will reduce the level of unnecessary cost overrun that we've experienced over the past years. So far, the 1.3 million, 1.4 million barrels that we've added over the 2009 plateau, it has cost Iraq around 72 billion US dollars. This is a lot of money. And if we had better and more efficient fiscal terms that will create enough incentives for the IOCs, as well as reducing the cost on these contracts, it could have generated more revenues, reduced the level of strain on budget that really endangered and contributed basically the budget deficit in Iraq over the past years, especially during the war on terror.
Your Excellency, I'd like to turn back to you for a minute, given that the conversation has shifted to the fiscal regimes in place. In announcing the new bidding round, the Ministry of Oil, in addition to aiming to maximize reserves, indicated it would offer different terms than in previous service contracts, and that foreign companies' opinions would be taken into account in framing these terms. I was wondering if you could give us a little more insight into what that process might look like, into how the ministry arrived at that decision, and what we'll be seeing from these contracts going forward.
Well, as I touched that the Ministry of Oil policy is, as far as with OPEC, that we are in full compliance with OPEC. We, in collaboration and coordination all the time. And, there is a committee, monitoring committee, and there is a daily follow-up by Ministry of Oil to see how the compliance is as far as the Iraq is concerned. There are some deviation here and there, but overall the results are satisfactory. Last month results in compliance was, the total was 120%. We hope that the whole the dynamic will continue throughout 2018. There are some sources here and there indicate that, okay, the market is flourishing now, and the market is the prices are healthy. So let us think about a sort of termination of the freeze. But this is really this is not right. This is a bad judgment, and we don't agree with such concepts. Iraq, in full agreement with OPEC members and non-OPEC members, that the freeze should continue. And as I said, that there are factors here and there, and the markets now is stabilizing somehow, but it is not 100% stable. We cannot say everything is rosy, but it has to be watched carefully. Thank you.
Thank you. Majid, since we've focused quite a bit in the early part of this conversation on the oil markets, I wanted to turn a bit to the gas potential that Iraq has. The issue of flaring has come up, and you have had some success in gas potential and production in country, and given the massive potential that Iraq does have, I'm wondering what your outlook is on the role that Iraq could play, given that it sits in a region that is expected to account for up to a fifth of global gas demand growth looking out to 2040.
Sure. So we've invested over $1 billion in the projects in the north of the country, in the Kurdistan region. And these two gas fields were thought to be, 1, 2 TCF. We've proven up reserves of over 15 TCF, potential resources of 80 trillion cubic feet, plus billion barrels, several billion barrels of oil potentially. And that was just in 2 fields. There are multiple non-associated gas fields across the country, in the west, in the south, in the center of the country, which have yet to be developed, in addition to the huge amounts of associated gas, which the minister referred to, which are being flared. And our primary focus, as regional companies, we look at addressing the local needs first. And that was really we were in our 10th year of production now. We're producing about 300 million cubic feet a day, plus 1,000 tons a day LPG, and 14,000 barrels a day condensate. We had a long-standing dispute with the regional government, which was successfully resolved earlier this year. And we're now looking to increase the production by about 20% by later this year, and potentially adding another 500 million cubic feet a day within 2 years. So significant growth. And the primary or priority focus is the local needs, not only in the Kurdistan region, but potentially elsewhere in Iraq, whether gas or electricity. But really, Iraq has enough gas to meet local needs, and that must be the first priority, electricity and industry, and achieve exports. I mean, there's been publicly intention to export to Kuwait soon, north and south by pipeline, and maybe LNG. I know that was one of the interests of Shell, was to do LNG exports from the south as well. And Iraq is strategically located that it can be doing all of these things. But of course, the first priority must be the local needs. It's, and that's natural, and it's also the highest and best use for the host government to replace liquid fuels. And we heard a lot yesterday how natural gas is a key fuel of this energy transformation that we've been hearing about in terms of reducing the carbon emissions, as well as huge economic value add. And, we heard from His Excellency, the UAE Minister, that for the 2050 vision for the UAE energy policy, it's almost an equal weighting between natural gas and renewables, because they're very complementary. And you need the natural gas to back up renewables because of availability factors.
Sure, and if I could just follow up on that, I was wondering, given the focus on the domestic market first and the role that natural gas could play in improving things like electric service provision or the creation of value-added industries and things like this, if you see any steps that can be taken to further develop and really enhance the creation of a domestic natural gas market in Iraq.
So I think creating the right investment models is very important to enable the private sector to invest in the different pieces of infrastructure. You need a lot more infrastructure with gas, of course. You need processing and pipelines, and so that's important. What kind of investment models? And of course, the regulatory framework. I mean, we heard about the fiscal regimes for the upstream, and the ministry now giving more flexibility, looking at different models which better align the investor with the host government. So it's not even about more attractive terms or less attractive terms. It's how to make sure that the investor is putting their risk capital to work for themselves and the government, and they're getting the right upside based on energy pricing, but increases production as quickly as possible while saving money for the government. And that's even more important with gas, because the investments are bigger, the payback takes longer, and you need to have a different mindset almost. And there's been talk by some politicians in Iraq that the ministry should be named as oil and gas, and more weighting be given to that aspect. And clearly part of that, as we discussed yesterday, is tackling subsidy and end user pricing, because of the electricity, which is a big part of the market, is not at the real pricing that, as His Excellency, the UAE Minister said, if you actually achieve real pricing, then you enable the investment in the upstream and in the midstream that's required. The whole value chain then becomes sustainable.
Yes, Mr. Minister.
Sorry.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Just really brief elaboration about the gas in Iraq and the gas industry in Iraq. The gas industry in Iraq is lacking behind, is still backward. I don't know, because of the circumstances of the country, the wars, political instability, social disturbances. The gas industry was left behind. Now Iraq possess about, by the time we reach our target of 7 million barrels per day, that's the Ministry of Oil plan, we will have about 6,000 million standard cubic feet of gas. That's associated gas. That's only associated gas. On the free gas, whereby we have free gas fields in the north as well in the Midland, we have about 2,800, 3,000 million standard cubic feet. This is only preliminary, but if we go more in exploration, I'm sure this is going to be double. So all in all, In a few years, we're going to reach about 10 million standard cubic feet of gas. What the country need? For the electricity, we need about 3,000. 3,000, we will get about 10,000 megawatt. And for local consumption, we need another 1,000 or something, and 500 for other services, other utilities. So we'll have access about 4,000 million standard cubic feet for export. That's preliminary. Let alone condensate, LPGs, and these things. So the industry really needs to be pushed, and we need investors, and definitely we need investors to help the country and to help the ministry to push this industry more and more and to make it out. 2016 witnessed good progress in this industry. As I said, we added about 600 million standard cubic feet, and we captured this, and we managed to export 700 to 800 metric ton of a day of LPG and about 20,000 barrel per day of condensate. This is the first time Iraq really entered this market, because Iraq was only exporting crude oil, but other products, gas, and these things were really out of the circle. So industry is moving, but you ask me whether it's within my ambition. I say no. I want it to move in a fast track. I want more investment, and I want the industry really to Iraq to be one of the countries that gas industry, a gas country, not only oil country. And the possibility is there, and the resources are there, and the gas is there. It needs only management and investment only. Thank you.
Thank you. And following on those comments, Lue, you wrote a fairly influential 2015 report on the electricity sector in Iraq. And of course, at the forum, one of the big topics this year has been the role that natural gas can play, both in the broader energy transformation when it comes to the role it can play in the power sector. And of course, in Iraq, the question is the role that natural gas may be able to play in improving electricity production, service provision, et cetera. So I'm wondering, following major investment announcements last year from the likes of GE Power and announcements from Siemens, how is the development of Iraq's electricity sector looking since 2015, and what role do you see for natural gas to play in the continual improvement of production and service provision?
Well, before the 2015 Brookings paper that I co-authored with my colleague, I wrote a paper for Harvard, Megan O'Sullivan, back in 2013 on the gas and geopolitics and the importance of gas play for the future of Iraq. The challenge that Iraq is facing is that misalignment has been on strategies. Earlier we've just heard from the minister talking about this ministry should not just to focus on oil, and I totally agree with him. It was back in 2008 when I suggested to the government that, in fact, the whole energy sector needs to be revisited, and I suggested that we just merge this whole sector of Ministry of Electricity, Oil, and Industry, is just call it Ministry of Energy, just to align all the strategies and rethink the future for Iraq. Something that the Saudis did 2 years ago when they restructured their institution. And this will eventually help to have a unified energy strategy. The situation in Iraq is quite complex when it comes to gas, because most of the proven reserves, about 80% of it, is in associated gas form. And this linked with the oil production scenarios. Now, I'm sure that the numbers that mentioned now in terms of how much we need gas for local demand are right for today. But when it comes to handling demand for a population of 50 million, that's in 10 years, I think we will be talking about 45 or more, 45 gigawatt of electricity. For this will require a lot of gas. And unless we invest significantly in renewable to diversify the fuel mix for the national grid. Now, the whole gas play need to be not only restructured, but the fiscal terms need to be incentivized for IOCs. At the moment, we only have the joint venture between Shell and South Gas Company and Mitsubishi. This needs to be replicated. We need to have more joint ventures that beyond the first licensing round, talking about the associated gas of the second licensing round and beyond. We also need to talk about rethinking the free gas, the non-associated gas. And surely, if we really think big for Iraq, this country will be transformed into an energy hub that not only meeting the much-needed local demand as it goes in tandem with the growth of the population, but provide energy security for the region when it comes to exports and handling the interconnectivity of electricity with neighboring countries, and freeing the burnt liquid for export. Also, we need to think of our petrochemical industry in a big way. Why not think to the level of Saudi Arabia? It's not impossible. Back in 1976, the petrochemical industry was launched in Iraq very much on the same year of SABIC. We hardly produce 400,000 tons of petrochemicals compared to, 50, 60 million tons of petrochemicals in Saudi Arabia. These need to be kind of like, we should not think small. We should think big. If we think big, we can achieve these big targets, and we can transform Iraq. If we just think today and in complete isolation of what is happening at regional level, internationally, I think we will not even achieve the planned targets. So, and this will require a significant work on the fiscal regimes and the investment environment, and basically rethinking how to define the future of Iraq.
So following up on the concept and the sentiment of thinking big, I want to pose one question to all of the panelists, starting first with you, Mr. Minister, before turning to the audience for Q&A, because I know we have several experts in the room. Given the challenges we've just discussed, and given the exhortation there at the end to really think big, and the idea of new joint venture models, the idea of new fiscal regimes, the idea of new industries to utilize Iraq's vast resources, I'm wondering, Mr. Minister, if we can start with you and then pose this question to each of the panelists. What are you most optimistic about and why, looking forward for Iraq? And what is one major either recommendation that you might have or change that you'll be implementing to really help Iraq meet its production potential?
I myself really, I am more than optimistic for Iraq. If you go through and just read the history of Iraq throughout thousands years or more, Iraq went through many difficulties, and then the country suddenly emerged as a strong and united and prosperous country. It's not the first time that Iraq went through this chaos and went through this difficult period and turbulence and all that. I am really confident that the country has so many means, so many deliveries. It has the country possesses, I think that it's a unique place that possesses natural resources, very rich in natural resources, very rich in water, and very rich in agriculture, very rich in irrigation, very rich. The most important of all those factors that make evaluation of a good nation is the human resources. Iraq possesses capabilities and great human resources. Iraq was the second country that gave in the Middle East to have engineer graduated from Imperial after Egypt. And Iraq was the first to have a medical doctor in the Middle East during the 30s before any other country. And Iraq is known as a country of civilization, and it's a cradle of the civilization. Now, if we come all these factors and not combine them all, but combine 2 or 3 of those factors, then the country will jump quickly. It's like a rocket, providing that good leadership and good management and strong leadership. The Iraqis' characteristic is with difficulties because they have been used to sort of, force or some sort of discipline. They have to be disciplined. But once they want come and put them on the right track, then they would develop very, very quickly. So I am very, very optimistic about the country. Maybe we don't witness it this year or next year, but definitely the coming future is bright for Iraq. This is one. 2, as for the energy, I am sure that Iraq possesses more than what is announced regarding the oil reserve, gas reserve, other resources. We have phosphate, we have uranium, we have, so, and we have sulfur, we have iron, we have. So Iraq, it needs sort of good, as I said, good management and investment, put it on the right track, and the country will be in a good shape. And my God, 2015, Iraq was almost broke financially. And the government was on the verge of not giving salaries to the people because there was no money in the bin. And everybody was shouting, how the government going to manage this and how. And the World Bank gave some loans, and with so much difficulties, but the countries after 1 year and so emerged in a good shape. Now our economy is improving, though we are in deficit, but it's improving. And the structure, the country is reshaping itself, restructuring in industry, agriculture, and other things. And I'm sure we have about 4 million people outside, doctors, engineers, and all scientists, all this smooth energy and dynamic energy that could contribute to the country, because I think most of you know that Iraqis, whatever they go, whenever they go or how long they stay outside, they still their tendency is attached to their country. So I repeat that I'm very optimistic.
Thank you, sir. And Majid, I would pose the same question to you, a recommendation or something you're excited about.
So I think, this time last year, the 2 risks for Iraq were, of course, ISIS and the, Kurdistan independence moves, and both seem to be, part of history now, and then there's somehow political stability, although there's still issues to address on both. So that's very positive. And I think very importantly is improving relations, very strong relations now with Saudi Arabia, with the UAE, with Kuwait. This meeting next month that Kuwait is hosting with the World Bank is extremely important to raise financial support for rebuilding the areas that were liberated from ISIS, because the reconstruction needs are huge. And that's important that the world gets behind that. And then also being very much back in the OPEC fold and playing an important role with world energy markets, I think is all very positive. And the recognition from the ministry of a need to adapt in terms of the investment models, I think is also positive. That there's been learning from what's worked, what hasn't worked in recent years. So all of those, I think, give cause to optimism. But the challenges are still many, and you can't be complacent about them, as the minister said.
And Luay, we'll close with you before turning to the audience.
Okay. I think the future is there for Iraq, but provided we need the member of OPEC members to be much more understanding and accommodating for Iraq. I mean, we need to be realistic. Kuwait planning to increase their production to 4 million, and they have about 4.5 million population. Saudi Arabia produces over 10 million, and with a population of 30 million. And Iraq we are approaching 40 million, and we are just touched the 4 million. I think if there is any formula need to be considered here, is not pro rata to reserve, pro rata to population and economic needs for a country. Especially Iraq held the fort during the fight on terror for many years. And if we need to really think big and plan, we need to think to achieve the 10 million barrels and go mega projects. So on all aspects, for any supply and demand requirements for OPEC member states, they really need to look into Iraq's priority and also to compensate for lost times and lost rights. Between 1980 to 2003, Iraq lost over 16 to 19 billion barrels worth of production market share, worth of $500 billion. I think it's about time for Iraq to be compensated. We don't need donation from neighbors. We don't need support, humanitarian support from neighbors. We need ethical generosity and supporting Iraq at these difficult times. And if anyone demonstrates some sort of mean in terms of balancing markets or what have you, I think we are facing big problems. If not only Iraq cannot afford to lose its success story, but the region cannot afford to see Iraq fall economically and politically, because it's the only country that held the fight against terror and preventing terrorism to spill over to neighboring countries, especially southward. And the other thing is that we lived very interesting times. We lived from the years of axis of evil to the statements of shithole countries. And excuse me, but and I'm very thankful to Prime Minister Haider Abadi, who successfully managed to get us off that list. But we are very much need to think seriously about the future. Everything has changed in the world. Energy mix, economies, politics, even traditional politics have moved from the politics we knew to TV show, and nowadays everyone betting open, even on Oprah Winfrey, to win by some time. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think the sentiment that the energy mix is changing and the geopolitical landscape as well is certainly one of the themes undergirding this year's Global Energy Forum. So with that, I would love to open it up to audience Q&A if anybody has a question. I see Ambassador Leif does in the first row. We'd be happy to hear from you, madam.
Thanks. Well, I've been watching Iraq for some years now, and what was striking in the comments here was there was a sort of one or two passing comments, references to the Kurdish issue, and on the one hand, it's kind of interesting that it's receded as an issue for the moment, but I wonder if it's really receded so much, and I would be very interested in His Excellency's thoughts about the forward looking issue with resolving issues not only with Erbil's relationship with Baghdad, but also the whole issue of the disputed internal boundaries and the territorial mix in the north. I'd be interested in anybody's comments on that as well. Thank you.
Would anyone like to take that question, or we can take a few more from the audience? But I think that's a big question in and of itself.
So my we accept the delegation. So, when it comes to oil and gas, I'm not going to comment on the politics around independence or whatever, but I think all sides accept and abide by the Constitution. The challenge is its interpretation, but also its application. When it comes to oil and gas, there are certain things which are sovereign authorities for the federal government, and then there are others which are for the governor. It's like here in the UAE, it's very clear what's federal and what's at the emirate level. But then oil and gas had this kind of in-between. It wasn't exclusively federal, and there were rights at the regional level and at the governorate level. And it talked about joint administration and revenue. So the principle of revenue sharing is there, and then joint administration. So none of that was put in place, unfortunately. So there have been shortcomings really on both sides, I think, from the federal government side and from the regional government side. But I think now, looking forward, there's a recognition that the principles of the Constitution need to prevail. And it's actually getting into the details now, what we're reading about the public statements. Prime Minister Abadi has accepted to pay the salaries. But the question is, how many salaries? The Kurdistan regional government says we have 1.2 million state workers, which is way more proportionally than southern Iraq has, which is already very high. And the federal government is saying at least 500,000 of those aren't real. There are people collecting more than one salary, or even ghost employees, and nobody really knows, and it's not quick and easy to determine that. Then there are issues about managing the borders. I think there's recognition from the KRG that the federal government needs to have oversight of borders. It's a sovereign thing, but they're worried about federal army taking complete control. So, airports, borders, I understand there's a delegation going today from the KRG to Baghdad to discuss these issues. So I think there are no major matters of principle, at least from what I see. But of course there's mistrust on both sides, and the devil is in the detail, and there needs to be will on both sides to address these, long-standing topics. And of course there's elections for both coming up this year, which complicates things.
Thank you. And I think we can have a few more responses to that question, and then we'll have to wrap things up for the next session.
Yeah. With regards to the issue in Iraq, specifically between Erbil and Baghdad, is that federalism never been implemented properly. Iraq as a federal state on paper, but when it comes to practice, there's a big clash between central practices in Baghdad and federal tendencies and applications in Erbil. And this created a major clash in allowing federalism to survive. So in a way, I disagree to say that federalism has failed in Iraq. Federalism never been given the chance to be implemented properly. And this is mainly because of the institutional vacuum at a federal level that defines the federal state. Let it be the Federal Energy Council or the federal institution of the revenue sharing that administers Iraq's returns and distribution fairly. And and the existence of the Federal Council, as well as the properly federal judicial authority as enshrined in the Constitution as per Article 92, not the institution we inherited from the transitional administrative law. So without these institutions in place, to say Iraq is a federal state, it's a misconception. And the absence of these institutions and the relevant laws that underpin such institution will continue to endanger the relationship between Baghdad and the region, and Baghdad and other provinces. And these need to be implemented, maybe not on the basis of political consensus. We've tried that, and this hindered the manifestation of these institutions. But to go for political majoritarian, and political majoritarian to pass these laws and have this institution in place, not necessarily the ruling parties or whatever. Those who monitor the politics in Iraq, they will see that all these parties now are very much creating a mixed coalition across Iraq. And this will help Iraq. That's what I want to close.
Your Excellency, I'll give you the benefit of the last word should you choose to take it. And otherwise, we'll go ahead and close the session. I would like to give you the opportunity to make a closing word, but otherwise we'll close the session, and I want to thank you so much for being here on behalf of the Atlantic Council. So if you have any further things to say, any words of wisdom on Iraq's energy future, and otherwise we'll close with the sentiment of Iraq as a pioneer in many respects, as you noted, and we'll look forward to hopefully welcoming you here again next year. Thank you.
I just wanted to say a thank you to Ellen and the report which is on your seats, which we were proud to support as part of our platinum support for the summit. She wrote it all herself, and it's actually very impressive. So please grab a copy and take a look, and I'd like to thank her for authorship of it and for moderating our panel also.
That's extremely kind, and I had lots of help. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would love
Same
to.
thing. Thank
And
you.
with that, we will close the session. I also want to thank Your Excellency, Minister of Energy and Industry, Suhail Al-Mazroui, for joining us here today. It's truly an honor to have you in our session. And Your Excellency for coming to the panel, for sharing your advice and wisdom, and to everybody else. We've got more great sessions upstairs. There's going to be a conversation on women in energy, which we're all really excited about starting soon. So hope you'll stick around for that, and thank you very much.